My name is Margaret Evans. I'm 60 years old, and until that moment, I thought I had a pretty good handle on my life and my relationships. I'd raised Claire as a single mother after her father passed when she was 12, and we'd always been close. Or at least, I thought we had been. Now I was questioning everything, wondering what I'd missed, what signs I'd overlooked that made my own daughter think I was losing my grip on reality. Claire Rebecca Evans Morrison is 32 years old, married for 4 years to a man whose family has never quite warmed up to our side of the family tree. She works as a marketing coordinator for a local real estate firm, and she's always been the type of person who worries about appearances, about what people think. Growing up, she was the kid who color coordinated her school supplies and never left the house without checking herself in the mirror 3 times. But this felt different from her usual concern about maintaining a perfect image. After Claire left that morning, still unaware that I'd overheard her conversation, I called my sister Linda. Linda Evans Walsh is 57, 3 years younger than me, and she's been my anchor through every major crisis in my adult life. She's a retired nurse who moved back to our hometown 5 years ago after her divorce, living just 20 minutes away in a small house she bought with her settlement money. Linda has this way of cutting through emotional chaos to get to the heart of things, probably from all those years dealing with medical emergencies. "Something's not right, Linda," I told her when she picked up. "Claire thinks I'm acting strange, and she's apparently warning David's family about me. I heard her on the phone this morning." Linda listened while I recounted the conversation I'd overheard, and I could practically hear her thinking on the other end of the line. "Margaret, when's the last time you really sat down and talked to Claire? Not just the surface stuff about work and weather, but really talked?" That question hit harder than I expected because I couldn't remember. Our conversations over the past few months had become increasingly brief and surface level, but I'd attributed that to her being busy with work and married life. The third person I knew I needed to talk to was my friend Joyce Martinez, someone who's known both Claire and me for over 15 years. Joyce and I met when Claire was in high school, and we were both volunteering for the same community theater production. She's 63, a retired high school English teacher who never married, but considers herself part of our extended family. Joyce has this unique perspective because she's watched Claire grow up from the outside, without the complicated emotions of being her mother. Joyce lives 2 streets over from me, and she's the kind of friend who notices things. She pays attention to changes in people's behavior, shifts in family dynamics, the subtle things that others might miss. If anyone would have insight into what was happening with Claire, it would be Joyce. When I called her that afternoon and explained the situation, Joyce was quiet for a long moment. "Margaret, I've noticed some things lately when I've seen you two together. There's a tension there that wasn't there before. Have you been going through anything stressful lately? Any changes in your routine or behavior that might seem unusual to Claire?" That question made me stop and think. Had I been acting differently? The past few months had been challenging in ways I hadn't really acknowledged. I'd been dealing with some health concerns. Nothing serious, but enough to make me more introspective. I'd also been making some changes to my daily routine, trying new things, exploring interests I'd put on hold while raising Claire and building my career. "I've been taking some art classes," I admitted to Joyce. "And I've been thinking about maybe traveling more, doing some things I never had the chance to do before. Maybe Claire sees that as me changing too much, too fast." But even as I said it, I knew there had to be more to it. The Claire I knew wouldn't go behind my back to warn people about me unless she genuinely believed something was wrong. The question was, what did she think she was seeing that I couldn't see in myself? As I hung up with Joyce, I realized I needed to approach this systematically. I needed to understand not just what Claire thought was happening, but why she felt the need to warn David's family specifically. His parents had always been polite, but distant. The kind of people who smiled and made small talk, but never really let you feel welcome in their circle. I spent the rest of that day replaying recent interactions, looking for clues about what might have triggered Claire's concerns. Had I said something inappropriate at their last family dinner? Had I behaved in a way that seemed erratic or concerning? The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became, because I genuinely couldn't pinpoint anything that would warrant the kind of warning I'd overheard. But what I discovered next cracked the case wide open. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My own journal. I retrieved the leather-bound notebook from my bedroom and began reading through the past few months of entries. What I found there made my stomach drop. The handwriting was mine, but the tone and content were different. Not dramatically so, but subtly off in ways that became more apparent as I read chronologically. In early entries, my writing was measured and thoughtful. But as the weeks progressed, there were increasingly scattered thoughts, abrupt topic changes, and observations that seemed disconnected from reality. One entry from 3 weeks ago described a conversation with Claire where I'd apparently told her I was considering selling my house and moving to Italy. I had no memory of that conversation. Another entry mentioned feeling suspicious that David was trying to turn Claire against me. But when I read it now, the reasoning seemed paranoid and unfounded. The most unsettling entry was from just 2 weeks ago. I'd written about attending Claire and David's anniversary dinner, describing how I'd noticed the other family members whispering and giving me looks, and how I'd confronted David's mother about it. According to my own handwriting, I'd accused her of talking about me behind my back and had demanded to know what they were all plotting. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my own words, with absolutely no memory of writing them or of the events they described. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone to call Joyce again. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the concern in her voice immediately. "Margaret, you sound upset." "Joyce, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you noticed anything unusual about my behavior lately? Anything that might seem concerning?" There was a pause that lasted too long. "What kind of things are you asking about?" "Memory issues, saying things that don't make sense, acting paranoid or confrontational." Joyce's sigh was audible through the phone. "Margaret, there have been a few times recently when our conversations felt disjointed. You'd bring up topics we'd never discussed, or you'd seem to think we'd made plans that we hadn't made. I thought you were just stressed or distracted. Because it wasn't constant, and when I'd gently question you about something, you'd seem genuinely confused. I thought maybe you were just overwhelmed with everything you'd been dealing with. I didn't want to make you feel worse." After I hung up with Joyce, I spent the rest of the morning going through the journal more carefully. The pattern was clear once I knew what to look for. There were gaps in my memory that corresponded with some of the more concerning entries. Days where I'd written about activities or conversations that felt foreign to me now. I was still processing this revelation when Claire's car pulled into my driveway just after noon. Through the window, I watched her sit in the driver's seat for several minutes before finally getting out and walking to my front door. Her knock was tentative, almost apologetic. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "We need to talk." Claire followed me to the living room, and I could see her eyes scanning the space, taking inventory, looking for signs of whatever she'd been worried about. "Before you say anything," I began, "I want you to know that I found some things that might explain why you've been concerned about me." Her posture shifted, becoming more alert. "What kind of things?" I showed her the journal entries, watching her face as she read through the pages I'd marked. With each entry, Her expression grew more pained, but also more relieved. "Mom, do you remember writing these?" "Some of them, yes, but others." I shook my head. "Claire, I have no memory of that anniversary dinner conversation I wrote about, and I definitely don't remember telling you I wanted to move to Italy." The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was terrifying. "How long has this been going on?" "I first noticed something about 4 months ago. You called me one evening, very upset, saying that someone had been in your house rearranging things. But when I came over to check, everything looked normal to me. You insisted that books had been moved, that someone had been through your mail. I thought maybe you'd had a break-in and just couldn't tell exactly what had been disturbed." I felt a chill run through me. "So, when you told David's family to be careful around me?" The weight of the situation settled over both of us. Claire had been watching her mother disappear in fragments, dealing with versions of me that I couldn't even remember being. And I had been living with gaps in my reality without even realizing it. "Claire, I think I need to see a doctor." She nodded, reaching for my hand. "I've been hoping you'd say that for months." But as we sat there, planning the next steps, neither of us could have predicted what the medical tests would reveal, or how much more complicated this situation was about to become. The next morning, I called my doctor's office while Claire sat beside me at my kitchen table. As I waited on hold, I could see her fidgeting with her coffee cup, the weight of months of worry finally showing on her face. "They can see me next Tuesday," I said after hanging up. "That's 5 days away." Claire nodded, then hesitated before speaking. "Mom, I think we should call David and Michael. They need to know what's really going on." The thought of that conversation made my stomach clench. What am I supposed to tell them? That their mother-in-law might be losing her mind and I don't even remember half of what I've done? "You tell them the truth, that you're having some medical issues and we're getting them checked out." I stared into my coffee, watching the steam rise. "Do you think David hates me now? After whatever I said at your anniversary dinner?" Claire reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "He doesn't hate you, Mom. He was confused and hurt, but when I explain what's been happening, he'll understand. David's not cruel." That afternoon, Claire called both David and Michael, asking them to come over. I spent the hour before they arrived pacing around my living room, trying to piece together fragments of memories that might or might not be real. Had I really accused David's mother of something at dinner? The harder I tried to remember, the more elusive it became. When they arrived, David's usual warm hug felt tentative, and I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Michael, always more direct, got straight to the point. "Claire said you wanted to talk to us about something important." The 4 of us sat in my living room, and I found myself looking at each of their faces, trying to read their expressions. Claire had positioned herself next to me on the couch, a silent show of support. "I need to tell you both something that's been happening to me," I began, my voice shakier than I'd intended. "I've been having episodes where I apparently say and do things that I can't remember afterward." David leaned forward, his expression shifting from wariness to concern. "What kind of episodes?" Claire pulled out my journal and handed it to me. "I've been writing things down, trying to make sense of it. According to this, and according to Claire, I've been having conversations and experiences that completely disappear from my memory." I opened to one of the entries I'd marked. "I wrote here about being angry with you, David, about something your mother said, but I have no memory of that dinner or that conversation." "Was she?" I asked. "Treating Claire badly?" Michael, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "So you're saying you don't remember having these confrontations at all?" That's exactly what I'm saying. And it's terrifying. I wake up some mornings and find notes I've written to myself, or Claire tells me about phone calls where I was upset about things I can't recall. The room fell silent. I could see Michael processing this information, his analytical mind working through the implications. David looked stricken, probably realizing that his coolness toward me over the past weeks had been in response to behavior I couldn't even remember. "Mom?" Michael said finally. "How long has this been going on?" Claire says she first noticed it about 4 months ago. But looking back at my journal, I think it might have started even earlier. I just didn't realize what was happening. David shifted in his chair, looking uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology. When Claire told us to be careful around you, I thought maybe you were just going through a difficult phase. I never imagined it was something medical." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "I can't expect you to understand behavior that I don't understand myself." Claire spoke up. "That's why I warned you both. I was trying to protect Mom from having these episodes turn into bigger conflicts before we could figure out what was causing them." Michael leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "What's the next step?" "Doctor's appointment on Tuesday. After that, probably tests, specialists. I honestly don't know what we're dealing with yet." As they were preparing to leave, David hugged me properly for the first time in weeks. "I'm sorry I've been distant," he said quietly. "I should have talked to you directly instead of just pulling away." "You were protecting your family," I replied. "I can't fault you for that." After they left, Claire and I sat in the gathering darkness of my living room, both of us emotionally drained. "Do you feel better now that they know?" she asked. "I think so. At least now I don't have to wonder what they're thinking about me." But as the days passed before my appointment, new concerns began surfacing. I found myself second-guessing every emotion, every reaction, wondering if what I was experiencing was real or if I was having another episode I wouldn't remember. The uncertainty was almost worse than the memory loss itself. Then, on Monday night, Claire called me, her voice tight with worry. "Mom, I just got off the phone with David. His mother called him tonight, very upset. She said you contacted her today and said some things that really disturbed her. Do you remember calling her?" My blood ran cold. I had no memory of making any phone calls that day. My heart started racing as I gripped the phone tighter. "Claire, I swear to you, I have no memory of calling anyone today. I've been home all afternoon, and I thought I was just reading and watching television." "Mom, take a deep breath. We'll figure this out," Claire said, though I could hear the strain in her voice. "David said his mother was really shaken up. According to her, you called around 3 o'clock and started talking about how David was trying to steal money from you and that Michael was in on some kind of conspiracy against you. I know you don't, Mom, but you apparently went into great detail about documents you thought they were hiding from you, and you kept insisting that the whole family was plotting something. David's mother said you sounded completely convinced it was all true." Around 3 o'clock. I closed my eyes, concentrating. I remember eating lunch around noon. I remember starting a crossword puzzle. Then the next clear memory I have is making dinner around 6. There's just this blank space in between. "That's over 5 hours, Mom." The reality of what was happening to me felt overwhelming. "Claire, what if this gets worse? What if I start doing things that really hurt people?" "We're going to the doctor tomorrow morning. We're going to get answers." "But what about David? What about his mother? She must think I'm completely unstable." Claire was quiet for a moment. "David is really worried about you, Mom. When his mother called him, his first concern was for your well-being, not anger about what you said." He asked her not to take it personally because he knows something medical is going on. I need to call him. I need to apologize. Mom, no, not tonight. You're upset, and making phone calls when you're emotional might not be the best idea right now. Let me handle this. You're still you, Mom. These episodes don't change who you are at your core. But what if they do change who I become? What if this is just the beginning? I heard Claire take a shaky breath. Then we'll face whatever comes next together. You, me, Michael, and David. We're not going anywhere. The next morning, Claire picked me up early for my doctor's appointment. I had barely slept, replaying the conversation about the phone call over and over in my mind. Any more memory gaps last night? Claire asked as we drove. I don't think so. But honestly, how would I know? That's the terrifying part. At the doctor's office, Claire came in with me and helped explain the situation. Dr. Patterson listened carefully, took notes, and asked detailed questions about the timeline of my symptoms. I'm going to refer you to a neurologist, he said finally. We need to run some tests to rule out various conditions. In the meantime, I think it would be wise to have someone stay with you, at least during the day. After we left the appointment, Claire and I sat in her car in the parking lot. I can take time off work, she said immediately. Or we can ask Michael to help with shifts. I can't ask you both to put your lives on hold for me. Mom, you're not asking. We're offering. My phone rang, and I saw Michael's name on the screen. I answered, putting it on speaker so Claire could hear. Mom, Claire told me what happened yesterday with the phone call. How are you holding up? I'm scared, Michael. I'm scared of what I might do next without even knowing it. Listen, I've been doing some research on memory issues and behavioral changes. There are a lot of treatable conditions that can cause these symptoms. We can't jump to worst-case scenarios yet. The doctor referred me to a neurologist. We're waiting to hear about an appointment. Good. In the meantime, I think we need a system. Maybe you could check in with one of us every few hours, just so we can help you keep track of your day. Claire nodded. I was thinking the same thing. And maybe we should set up a simple journal system where you write down what you're doing every hour or so? You both want to babysit me, I said, feeling a mix of gratitude and frustration. As we talked through practical arrangements, I felt some of the panic from the night before beginning to ease. But deep down, I knew that yesterday's phone call had crossed a line. I had apparently accused people I cared about of terrible things, and I had no memory or control over it happening. The question that haunted me was simple but terrifying. What would I do next? 2 days later, Claire called with news about the neurologist appointment. I got you in for next Tuesday, she said. Dr. Chen had a cancellation. That's sooner than I expected. I sat at my kitchen table, dutifully writing in the journal we'd set up. So far, today's entries were mundane. Breakfast at 8 a.m., watered plants at 9:30, called Claire at 10:15. How's the journal working out? It's helping, I think. At least I can look back and see what I actually did versus what I think I did. I flipped through the pages. Yesterday, I wrote that I spent 2 hours organizing my bedroom closet, but I have no memory of doing it. When I checked, everything was perfectly arranged by color and season. That's not necessarily bad, Mom. After we hung up, I continued with my hourly journal entries. But something felt off about the day. There was a nagging sense that I was forgetting something important, something beyond the usual memory gaps. Around 3 p.m., Michael arrived for what we'd started calling his check-in visits. How are you feeling today? He asked, settling into the chair across from me. Anxious. More anxious than usual. I closed the journal. Michael, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Of course. When you talked to Sarah about what I said in that phone call, what exactly did she tell you? Michael shifted uncomfortably. Mom, we've been over this. You made some accusations that upset her family. But what specifically? I need to know what I'm dealing with here. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his words carefully. You told her that her husband was stealing from his parents. You said you had proof, and that she needed to confront him immediately, or you would. I stared at him, trying to process this information. But I would never do that. I don't even know how I would get access to that kind of information. That's what makes this so concerning. Either you did research that you don't remember doing, or your mind created very specific false details. Questions about their finances, their house payments, how they could afford certain things. She thought you were just being a concerned mother-in-law, but now she's questioning whether you've been investigating them somehow. The journal slipped from my hands and hit the floor. The implications of what Michael was telling me were staggering. If Sarah was right, then my strange behavior hadn't started with the phone call. It had been going on for months, and I had no memory of any of it. Michael, I whispered. What if I've been doing things for months without remembering? What if the phone call was just the first time I went far enough for someone to confront me about it? Before he could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah's name, and we both stared at it in silence. This would be the first time she'd called since the incident. Should I answer it? I asked, my hand trembling over the phone. I think you have to, Michael said quietly. I picked up the phone, dreading what Sarah might tell me about what I'd done now. I answered the phone with shaking hands. Hello, Sarah. Mom! Her voice was strained, careful. Michael told me he was coming to see you today. How are you feeling? I'm scared, honey. Michael told me what I said about your husband, about the money. I don't remember any of it. There was a long pause. That's what worries me, Mom. You were so specific. You said he'd taken $1,200 from his mother's checking account on March 15th, and another $800 the week before. You even mentioned that he'd been forging her signature. My stomach lurched. Those details were so precise, so calculated. Sarah, I swear to you, I have no memory of saying any of that. I don't even know your mother-in-law's financial situation. But you also don't remember calling me 3 times last Tuesday, asking if I was safe at home, or stopping by my house on Thursday when I wasn't there, and asking my neighbor if she'd seen any strange cars in the driveway. I looked at Michael in horror. He was hearing this for the first time too, and I could see the worry deepening in his eyes. I did those things? My voice came out as barely a whisper. Michael, I said, looking at my son while keeping Sarah on the line. When you were here last month, did I seem different to you then? He ran his hands through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. You asked a lot of questions about my job, about whether I felt secure there. You wanted to know if anyone had been treating me differently. At the time, I thought you were just being caring. But now that I think about it, you seemed almost worried that something bad was happening to me specifically. You did the same thing to me in February, Sarah said through the phone. You kept asking if I was happy in my marriage, if I felt safe, if I needed help with anything. I thought you were being supportive, but you kept pressing even after I assured you everything was fine. Michael leaned forward. Mom, do you remember feeling worried about us, even if you don't remember the specific conversations? The thing is, Sarah continued, when you made those accusations about my husband, you weren't just suspicious. You were absolutely certain. You said you had proof, and that if I didn't handle it, You would take matters into your own hands. What did she mean by that? Michael asked. She said she was going to contact his parents directly and show them the evidence she'd gathered. She was completely convinced that she was protecting our family from him. The implications of this hit me full force. In my altered state, I hadn't just been paranoid. I'd been actively planning to interfere in my daughter's marriage based on false information I somehow believed I possessed. Sarah, did I tell you where this supposed evidence came from? I immediately thought of the journal I'd been writing in, the one that was now on the floor beside my chair. I need to check something, I said, putting the phone on speaker so I could pick up the notebook. I flipped through the pages I'd written since the incident, then went further back. The earlier entries were in my handwriting, but as I read them, my blood ran cold. Michael, Sarah, listen to this. This is from an entry dated 6 weeks ago. I read aloud. Noticed Sarah seemed nervous when talking about finances today. Her husband changed the subject quickly when I asked about their mortgage payment. Something doesn't feel right. Need to pay closer attention. I flipped to another page. 3 weeks ago, saw Sarah's husband at the bank when he said he was at work. Why would he lie about something so simple? Sarah doesn't know I saw him. Should I tell her? My hands were trembling as I continued reading entries that I had absolutely no memory of writing. Each one documented suspicions and observations that painted a picture of someone I didn't recognize. Someone obsessive and paranoid, convinced that danger lurked around every corner of my children's lives. The most terrifying realization was beginning to dawn on me. If I was writing detailed journal entries that I couldn't remember, making accusations based on evidence I believed I had gathered, and planning interventions that seemed completely logical to me at the time, then the problem was much more serious than occasional memory lapses. I was living portions of my life in a completely different mental state, one where my normal judgment and memory were severely compromised. And if it was getting worse, as the escalating incidents suggested, then what I might do next was completely unpredictable. The silence on the phone stretched out as Michael and Sarah processed what I'd just read. I kept staring at the handwriting that was undeniably mine, documenting surveillance activities I couldn't remember performing. The phone numbers scrawled in the margins were written in blue ink, while the rest of the entry was in black, suggesting I'd added them later during some research phase I had no recollection of. Mom, can you read those phone numbers? Sarah's voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the underlying fear. You are sitting, Mom, Michael said gently. Remember, you're in your living room with us on speakerphone. I flipped through more journal pages, finding entries that documented times I'd driven to Sarah's neighborhood and parked across the street to observe their house. According to my notes, I'd done this multiple times, recording when people arrived and left. I'd even written down license plate numbers of visitors. The most disturbing entry was dated just 5 days ago. In careful handwriting, I'd documented a plan to create a fake emergency to get Sarah alone so I could warn her properly about the financial deception. I'd apparently spent considerable time crafting a story about a minor accident that would require her to come help me, giving me an opportunity to present my evidence without her husband present. Sarah, did I call you about any kind of accident recently? Something that seemed strange or didn't quite add up? There was a pause. Actually, yes. You called Tuesday saying you'd backed into a mailbox and needed help dealing with the property owner. But when I got there was no damage to your car, and you seemed confused about which mailbox you meant. You kept changing the story? I found Tuesday's entry. It described executing the emergency plan, but noted that I'd gotten confused during the conversation and hadn't been able to present my evidence effectively. The entry concluded with a resolution to try again with better preparation. That's what makes it so scary, Mom. You sound completely normal when you're talking about these things. There's no way to tell that you're not thinking clearly. The phone numbers in the margins represented how close I'd come to destroying relationships and reputations based on delusions I couldn't even remember having. If I'd made those calls, if I'd contacted Tom's supervisor or other people in their lives with my suspicions, the damage would have been irreversible. I need to know what stopped me from making these calls. There must be something that prevented me from going through with the more serious plans. I flipped to the most recent entries, looking for clues about what had interrupted my investigation. The final entry was only partially complete, ending mid-sentence as if I'd been interrupted while writing. The last coherent line read, "Tomorrow, I'll call Tom's office and request a meeting with his supervisor. Sarah deserves to know the truth about what I've discovered." Below that, in shakier handwriting, was a single word repeated several times. Confused. I think I was starting to come out of it while writing this last entry. Look at how the handwriting changes. "Mom, we need to figure out what triggers these episodes," Michael said, carefully taking the journal from my hands. "There has to be a pattern we can identify." I appreciated that he was trying to approach this scientifically, but the randomness of it all felt overwhelming. I've been trying to think of what might have started this recent one. The days before are mostly blank, but I remember feeling anxious about something. When was the last time you talked to Sarah before this happened? Off how? Michael sat quietly for a moment, and I could see him processing everything we'd discovered. Finally, he spoke with careful deliberation. "I think we need to call Sarah, not to apologize or explain everything right now, but just to let her know that you're okay and that you're aware something happened." The thought of talking to Sarah filled me with dread. What if I can't tell the difference between reality and whatever I was thinking during the episode? What if I still believe some of those things about Tom? I knew he was right, but the fear of further damaging my relationship with Sarah was paralyzing. According to my own journal, I'd been planning to contact Tom's workplace to essentially accuse him of hiding something serious from my daughter. Even if I hadn't followed through, Sarah knew I'd been thinking along those lines. She probably thinks I'm losing my mind completely, and honestly, Michael, I'm starting to wonder if she's right. "You're not losing your mind, Mom. This is clearly something specific that happens and then passes. The person writing in this journal is organized and coherent, just operating from false premises. That's different from general mental deterioration." I wanted to believe him, but the evidence was hard to ignore. What if next time I don't snap out of it? What if I actually make those phone calls or confront Tom directly? I could destroy their marriage based on something that exists only in my head. The weight of that possibility settled over us both. I could see Michael struggling with the same fear, trying to figure out how to protect both me and Sarah from whatever version of me might emerge during the next episode. "Maybe we should talk to Sarah about setting up some kind of system," he suggested. "Some way for her to know when you're not thinking clearly, and some way for you to recognize it too." How can I recognize something when I'm convinced it's real? According to this journal, I spent weeks gathering evidence and making plans. I wasn't questioning my own perceptions at all. Michael picked up the journal again, flipping through the pages more slowly. "Look at the dates, Mom. This episode lasted almost 3 weeks. That's a long time for Sarah to watch you acting strangely without saying anything. She must have tried to talk to you about it." He was right. If I'd been behaving oddly for 3 weeks, Sarah wouldn't have just warned Tom's family and left it at that. She would have attempted to reach out to me, to understand what was happening, but I had no memory of any such conversations. "This is what scares me the most," I admitted. I could have entire conversations with people during these episodes and have no memory of them afterward. Sarah might have tried to help, and I probably dismissed her concerns, or gave her explanations that seemed perfectly reasonable to me at the time. The phone rang, startling both of us. Michael looked at me questioningly, and I nodded for him to answer it. My heart was already racing, afraid it might be Sarah calling at the exact moment we'd been discussing her. "Hello?" Michael's voice was cautious. I watched his face carefully, trying to read his expression. He was quiet for a long moment, listening, and then his eyebrows drew together in concern. "Yes, she's here. Can I ask what this is regarding?" Another pause. "I think there might be some confusion about that. Can you hold on a moment?" He covered the phone with his hand and turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Mom, this is someone from Tom's office. They're saying you've been calling them repeatedly over the past few days, and they want to discuss your concerns about Tom with you directly." The room seemed to tilt around me. According to the journal, I'd planned to call Tom's office, but the final entry suggested I'd been interrupted before following through. Apparently, I'd been wrong about that. Michael kept his hand over the phone, his eyes filled with concern and confusion. I could hear a faint voice on the other end, patient but persistent. "I don't remember making any calls," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. The journal had documented my plans, and now reality was catching up with whatever version of me had been making decisions I couldn't recall. "What should I tell them?" Michael asked quietly. I took a shaky breath. There was no point in running from this anymore. "Put it on speaker." I need to know what I said. Michael pressed the speaker button and removed his hand. "Hello? This is Michael, her son. Could you please explain what's been happening?" "Of course. This is Janet from Human Resources at Morrison & Associates. We've received several calls from your mother over the past 4 days regarding Tom Henderson, one of our employees. She's expressed some very serious concerns about his behavior toward his wife Sarah." My stomach dropped. 4 days. I'd been making these calls for 4 days and had no memory of any of them. "What kind of concerns?" Michael asked, looking at me with growing worry. "Well, she's mentioned observing what she believes to be controlling behavior, potential emotional abuse, and she's asked us to monitor his work performance for signs that he might be under stress due to domestic issues. She also requested that we document any complaints from female colleagues." I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of my actions settling over me. Even in my confused state, I'd been trying to build a case against Tom, using his workplace as part of my investigation. "I'm sorry," I managed to say. "I've been having some memory issues lately. Could you tell me exactly what I said in these calls?" "Memory issues?" Janet's voice softened slightly. "Oh my. Well, you were very articulate and seemed quite concerned. You mentioned specific incidents where you witnessed Tom raising his voice with Sarah, and you expressed worry that Sarah was afraid to speak up about problems in their marriage." Michael was staring at me now, and I could see him processing this information alongside everything we'd just read in the journal. The difference was that these calls had actually happened. This wasn't just planning and paranoid thoughts written in a notebook. I'd actually involved Tom's employer in my suspicions. There was a pause on the other end. "I see. That's concerning. We take reports of potential domestic issues very seriously, but if you're now saying the information wasn't reliable?" "What I'm saying is that I may have misinterpreted normal marital conversations as something more serious. I don't believe Tom is abusive, and I don't think Sarah is in any danger." Michael nodded encouragingly, but I could see the strain in his face. We both knew this was just the beginning of cleaning up whatever damage my episode had caused. "Well, we haven't taken any formal action yet," Janet said carefully. "We were actually calling to schedule a time for you to come in and provide a more detailed statement, Given what you're telling me now, perhaps that's not necessary. No, I think it is necessary, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. I need to come in and formally retract my concerns. Tom doesn't deserve to have this hanging over him at work because of my confusion. After we arranged a meeting for the next day and ended the call, Michael and I sat in silence for several minutes. The weight of what had just happened felt enormous. Mom, if you called Tom's work, what else might you have done during this episode that you don't remember? It was the question I'd been dreading, but it needed to be asked. I thought about the journal entries, the detailed observations, the plans I'd made. How much of it had moved beyond just thoughts and notes? I need to call Sarah, I said finally. Are you sure you're ready for that conversation? I don't think I'll ever be ready, but I can't keep hiding from this. If I called Tom's workplace, Sarah has a right to know. And maybe she can help me understand what else happened during those weeks that I can't remember. Michael picked up my phone and scrolled through the recent calls. His expression grew more troubled as he looked. Mom, according to this, you called Tom's office 6 times, but you also called Sarah's number 14 times over the same 4-day period, and there are several calls to numbers I don't recognize. What did I say to her during those calls? I whispered. There's only one way to find out, Michael said gently. But maybe I should be here when you call her. This conversation is going to be difficult for both of you. I nodded, knowing he was right. But as I looked at the phone in his hands, I realized there was something else I needed to know first. Michael, those other numbers you don't recognize, can you call them back? I need to know who else I contacted before I talked to Sarah. His face went pale as he looked at the phone again. Mom, one of these numbers, it's been called 8 times, and looking at the area code, I think it might be. Mom, one of these numbers, it's been called 8 times, and looking at the area code, I think it might be Tom's mother's number. My blood ran cold. If I had been calling Janet at Tom's workplace, and Sarah repeatedly, and now possibly Tom's mother directly, the scope of my confused state was far worse than I'd imagined. Call it, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I need to know. Michael hesitated, his finger hovering over the number. Are you sure? What if she answers? Then I'll apologize and explain. But I can't move forward without knowing what damage I've done. He pressed the call button and put it on speaker. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. Hello? It was indeed Tom's mother, Patricia. I could hear the wariness in her voice, probably recognizing my number on her caller ID. Patricia, this is Margaret, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm calling with my son Michael here because I need to apologize for any calls I may have made to you recently. I've been experiencing some medical issues that affected my judgment and memory. There was a long pause. When Patricia spoke again, her tone was careful but not unkind. Oh, Margaret. Yes, you did call several times. I wasn't sure what to make of it. You seemed very concerned about Sarah's safety, and you kept asking if we'd noticed any changes in Tom's behavior toward her. I closed my eyes, feeling sick. What exactly did I say? You mentioned that you were keeping detailed records of Tom's activities, and you asked if we could help you monitor him. The last few calls became quite urgent. You said you had evidence that Sarah was in danger, but that she wouldn't listen to you. Michael reached over and squeezed my hand as I struggled to process this information. Patricia, I want you to know that none of that was based in reality. I was experiencing confusion due to a medication issue, and my concerns about Tom were completely unfounded. He's a good husband to Sarah, and I sincerely apologize for alarming you. Has Tom heard about any of this? I asked, dreading the answer. I did mention it to him yesterday. He was quite upset, not angry, but worried about you. He asked if we should reach out to Sarah or Michael to make sure you were okay. I looked at Michael, who was shaking his head with a mixture of sadness and concern. Patricia, I'm going to be calling Sarah today to discuss all of this. I wanted to apologize to you first and let you know that I'll be getting proper medical care to make sure this doesn't happen again. I appreciate that, Margaret, and I want you to know that we don't hold this against you. When someone's not well, they're not themselves. Tom will be relieved to hear that you're getting help. After we ended the call, I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the extent of what I'd done. Mom, you involved Tom's entire family in this delusion, Michael said gently. Can you imagine how Sarah must have felt when Tom came home and told her that his mother had been receiving calls from you, claiming he was dangerous? She must have been mortified and terrified. If someone told me that my mother-in-law was calling around spreading concerns about my husband, I trailed off, the full impact hitting me. Oh God, Michael, I didn't just embarrass Sarah, I attacked her marriage from multiple angles. Which explains why she felt she had to warn Tom's family to be careful around you. She was probably trying to do damage control while also protecting her relationship. I picked up my phone with trembling hands. I need to call her now. She deserves to hear this directly from me. Michael nodded. Do you want me to stay? Please. I have a feeling this conversation is going to be even harder than the others. I dialed Sarah's number, and she answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for my call. Mom? Her voice was cautious. Sarah, honey, I need to talk to you about everything that's happened. Michael is here with me, and I want you to know that I've figured out what was wrong. I've been having severe reactions to a new medication that caused confusion and memory problems. There was silence on the other end for several long moments. Mom, you called me so many times, and the things you were saying about Tom. Her voice broke slightly. You scared me. You were so convinced that he was going to hurt me. And when I tried to tell you that wasn't true, you said I was being manipulated and couldn't see clearly. My heart ached hearing the pain in her voice. I have no memory of those conversations, sweetheart. What else did I say? You told me you were documenting evidence against him. You said you'd already contacted people who could help protect me. When I asked what people, you became secretive and said I'd understand later when you had enough proof. Michael leaned closer to the phone. Sarah, it's Michael. Mom called Tom's workplace and reported concerns about his behavior. She also called his mother multiple times. She's been making apologies and retractions all morning. You called his work? Sarah's voice rose with distress. Mom, do you understand what this could do to his career, to our lives? I know, and I'm so sorry. I spoke with Janet this morning and I'm going in tomorrow to formally retract everything. But Sarah, I need to know. What else happened during those weeks that I can't remember? Sarah took a shaky breath. You showed up at our house twice when Tom was at work. You went through our mail, looking for what you called financial evidence. You took pictures of Tom's desk area with your phone. The second time, I had to ask you to leave because you were going through our bedroom, checking for what you said were signs of controlling behavior. And when I tried to set boundaries, you told me I was protecting my abuser and that you wouldn't enable my denial. You said if I wouldn't accept help, you'd have to take other measures. Michael and I exchanged alarmed looks. What other measures? He asked. I don't know, but that's when I decided I had to warn Tom's family. I was afraid of what you might do next, and I thought if they knew you weren't well, They might be more understanding if you contacted them. The pieces were finally falling into place. Sarah hadn't been trying to turn people against me. She'd been trying to protect everyone involved from my confused actions. Sarah, I am so deeply sorry. I violated your trust, your marriage, and your home. I put your husband's job at risk and caused tension with his family. There's no excuse for what I did, even though I wasn't in my right mind. Mom, I was terrified that I was losing you to some kind of paranoid break. And I was angry that you could think so badly of Tom when he's been nothing but good to me and respectful to our family. You were right to be angry. And you were right to protect your husband and your marriage from my interference. I just wish I understood why I fixated on him specifically. Sarah was quiet for a moment. I think I might know. Do you remember, about a month before this started, there was that news story about the woman whose mother-in-law tried to prove her husband was abusive? I searched my memory and a vague recollection surfaced. The case where the mother-in-law hired a private investigator? Yes, and it turned out the husband was actually being abused by his wife, and the mother-in-law's interference made everything worse. You were really upset about that story. You kept talking about how the mother-in-law's heart was in the right place, but her actions were destructive. Michael nodded thoughtfully. So, when your medication started affecting your thinking, your mind might have taken that story and twisted it around, making you think you were in a similar situation, but needed to be the protective mother-in-law. It's possible, I said. But regardless of why it happened, I need to make this right. Sarah, what can I do to repair the damage I've caused? Напишите в комментариях, в какой момент у вас все сложилось.